Hey guys, Jeremy here with Simple Little Life. Welcome to another edition of Tool Time Tuesday. This week, we're going to take a look at those knockoff TORMEK knife sharpening systems. Are they any good? First, let me caveat this video by saying that I've never actually used a TORMEK, so this isn't going to be a video that's going to compare the actual TORMEK to the knockoff version. However, these knockoff knife sharpeners seem to be so common lately, and I'm seeing more and more of them. If you are a new knife maker and you struggle with sharpening your knives, as I did for years and years and years, is this going to be a viable option? Is this going to get you nice, consistent edges without all the worry? The one reason I wanted to look at these systems is because they sharpen with water, so they cool the blade, and there's the great debate whether or not, if you're using a machine like the paper wheels or even on your belt grinder, if you're generating too much heat at the apex, basically that wire burr that you're rolling over as you're cutting the new bevel, a lot of folks say that the temper is completely ruined in that piece. And essentially, like at the very finest point of your cutting edge, you've ruined the temper. And I certainly do understand the theory behind it, and I'm slowly being persuaded more to that end. However, just in my own use, whether I'm using my grinder or the paper wheels, I sharpen a knife for my kitchen, I use that knife in my kitchen, those edges last a long time, and it's not like I'm cutting them like, man, this thing is really not performing well. So I think in theory, yes, it might make a difference, but from my standpoint, in practicality, I can't really tell it. Having said that, if the theory is there and you can figure a way to work with the theory, it kind of makes sense just to go with it. So I'm going to walk you around this thing. I'll show you some of the features. Let's check this thing out. All right, so here is the machine. Essentially what we have is a stone. This is a 220 grit, 10-inch diameter, and it looks to be about 2 inches wide. And the key to this whole setup, just with the TORMEKs, is that it's in water constantly. So this thing is cool, your knife is being cooled, it pulls the debris away, fresh stone. It's kind of a great concept. Right in the middle here, we've got the tooling support rod, and this is adjustable. Now, there's no graduations or ways to specifically tell what angle you're going to be sharpening at. I'll give you a little trick in a minute where you can kind of match existing bevels, but this kind of comes with a little bit of trial and error. You'll also notice that there's also another set on this side, so we could put this bar in this way had we wanted to, and a lot of times this will come into play when you're sharpening different things. And then on the right side here, we've got a suede or a little leather stropping wheel, essentially just kind of power stropping. Now, this is plastic, which is kind of disconcerting. Also, this wheel isn't perfectly concentric, so you're not getting perfect results. But overall, for that price, for 179 Canadian pesos, this is looking fairly promising. We've got the switch in the middle. One thing to note is this is bi-directional, so I can turn it this way. You can see we're pulling up our nice water bath. And then depending on how I have my work rest set up, I can actually run it the other way. This is a very key thing for safety, in my opinion, though. If you were going to strop your knife and you had it running towards you, that would be a very dangerous situation. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. And I'll just give you a quick walk around so you can kind of see the overview. Now, the one thing that really has me quite interested is whether or not these wheels are the same size as the actual TORMEK wheels. The reason I wonder about that is because if they are, you could get different grits. Now, this is like some generic chain, I mean, it's Canadian Tire stuff, right? I grew up calling it crappy tire because my dad told me that, but 220 grit is gonna leave quite a toothy edge, and some people love that. So when we think about that for a minute, things like pocket knives, EDC, hunting knives, those are usually doing kind of rough and tumbly sort of tasks, right? You're cutting open packing tape, you're cutting cardboard, you're cutting rope. You're not necessarily doing the same tasks as in a kitchen knife, where if you're cutting a tomato and you want to, it's a very delicate tissue that you want a very clean slice through. For those applications, you definitely want a higher polish on your sharpening. When I do my kitchen knives, I take them to 1000 grit, and there's a lot of people that say that's not nearly enough, but this one is a 220 grit, so it's gonna leave you a fairly toothy edge. However, I have found a way that I can do the stropping part of this that actually gives me the ability to cut paper, even phone book paper, quite cleanly, and it is very quick. One other thing to notice about this, though, is that the knife clamp that they give you, this is what comes with it, and the idea is that it slides onto the bars like this. But I have yet to figure out how you could use this to sharpen a knife, and I tried fiddling with it in every different way imaginable. Essentially, how they sell this to you, I don't think you can sharpen a knife with it. Luckily, there's a workaround, and this is something that I just happen to have. You could buy this, and this is, I would say that if you want to go with this sharpener, you're going to need to get this extra part, which incidentally is made by TORMEK themselves, and this is their knife clamp. These things are about 40, 50 bucks Canadian, so probably like $30 American. You can get them on Amazon, and they also make longer versions as well. I just got the basic one here, and the way that this works, all right, so essentially we've got this screw right here, and this is your main clamping screw. So you put your knife in there, tighten this down. A lot of times you want to protect the knife with some tape, and then this is like a little jacking screw, right? Little jacking bolt, you do that, and this pushes this up on this fulcrum. Basically got a pivot. Now we're really clamping down real tight on here, and voila, we've got our knife held nice and evenly. We can do micro adjustments as far as how this bar up and down, how far it goes, and then this whole issue gets supported on this bar like so. Now the first knife we're going to sharpen is actually one of the knives that we did in our Simple Little Life build along series. If you're not familiar with that, it's something we do in this channel. We've got a new one coming out in February, so stay tuned for that. But this is just a simple knife, 1084 high carbon steel, little petty kitchen knife. I did this very simplistic. We're going to put a little edge on here. So let's just go ahead and get this thing clamped up. One thing I really like with the TORMEK clamps is that they don't require tools, and that's kind of handy. Well, it kind of bothers me sometimes with different knife clamps when you've got to get special Allen wrenches and stuff. It's just not as convenient as something like this where you just got little thumb wheels. So we're going to clamp the blade in here, kind of pick roughly where. I don't get too crazy measuring it out, this or that or anything else. I just pinch this with my fingers, tighten up this one, and then we tag into this little jacking bolt. So crank that up, knife's in there nice and secure, and I put this roughly about in the middle. So one thing I want to figure out is I want to try and roughly match that angle. If it's a brand new knife, well, you kind of get a feel for where it's supposed to be, but ideally I want this to be around 18 to 20 degrees. One tip, if you have a knife that already has an edge that's just dull, so one way to match that bevel is you take a Sharpie and mark just the existing bevel. So you can kind of see it there. Now when we go to our stone and we press it on there, we can look and see if we're taking the whole Sharpie off evenly or if we're just taking this top end or just near the edge, and we can adjust accordingly. And I'm just going to do a little test. I can tell already this is going to be too high. So I'm just going to lift this up right here. So I'm way too high. I need to lift this bar up quite a bit so I can match that angle of the dangle. So let's try this right here. Ah, yes. So what we've done is we have completely removed the Sharpie mark. And so now we know we've pretty much matched that bevel. All right, so now it's just a matter of consistently doing even passes, and basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna grind until we feel a burr. What that burr is it's the metal that we've ground over. So if I'm sharpening on this side, I'll drag my burr over on this side, and the way that I feel for it is just with my fingers like this. You'll kind of catch, you'll feel a little hang up. That's when you know you've got a burr, and that's basically when you know you've taken that material all the way down. Like that edge is at an edge, and now we're folding it over. So we're gonna do a couple passes, maybe one or two on this side. I always like to start at the heel and go to the tip. Starting to feel a burr. I'm gonna do another pass. Now this is a bit of a messy process, so keep that in mind. I also found that when this was sitting on my workbench in the garage, it was actually too high. I've just got it on this little like temporary work table here, and it works pretty good. So I can feel the burr starting on this side. I think we've got a burr the whole way. So now I'm going to jump to the other side. It's looking nice and even. I'm going to do about the same number of passes here because the burr will develop very quickly on this side, but I want to be removing even amounts of metal on each side. One way you can tell is by looking at the bevel and seeing how big it is. Kind of want to match the size on both sides, so I'm going to do another little quick pass or two. It's looking pretty good. So one thing I find helps is that I use this top hand and I keep pressure down on this so that this doesn't slide up on me. And then the idea as well, one thing I find helps is instead of working in one spot and just articulating, if you can, go the length of the blade while keeping it as flat as possible. Those are just my personal preferences when I'm doing this. I'm not saying there's any science behind it, but it works well for me. So now I've got a burr pulled evenly. Both those micro bevels are roughly the same size. I'm going to go the slightest little bit more on this side. Cool. So with this thing here, what I was trying to do before was basically either leave this the same and go to the Strop, but the Strop is, I think it's about an 8-inch diameter. It's noticeably a smaller diameter of wheel, so obviously your contact point in the wheel is going to change, your angle is going to change. Now ideally, we don't care necessarily so much about stropping the flat of the bevel, it's just that apex. And I tried fiddling with this, trying to come up with some rationale, some reasoning as to how I could set this up. Couldn't come up with anything that was working well using this, so the way that I transition now to the Strop is without this altogether. So I'll take the knife out of the clamp and I'm going to dry it off a little bit. Now they give you some compound here. It's funny, it looks like a little toothpaste tube with no markings on it whatsoever. I'll show you here real quick. Something like that. And the way I did that, I just kind of smeared it all around like this with the machine not running so I could really work it into there nicely. Maybe we'll give it another dressing. When something's brand new leather like this, sometimes it takes a bit to really work it in. We'll get that all worked in real good. It's probably plenty, probably wasting like crazy here. Also, the thing I like about this is that, you know, it's a brand new leather wheel. If you've got a different compound that you love or your personal preference is something different, you can just use that and it doesn't really matter. Fired up. Again, this is the part that terrifies me. If you push it and the stone's running this way, you're gonna grind, it's not gonna really grab. You're on this piece of leather, make sure it's running away from you, because if it was running towards you, it's definitely gonna catch. I mean, it's not like it's rotating fast. I don't know what the RPM is on this. Anyways, with the belt, with the leather going this way, I just come in here and I just kind of roughly, as if I were going to a leather strop, that's the angle that I use. See, right now, if we test this edge out, it's not gonna do too well, because we've got that burr on there, it's rolled over. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in here like this. But the one thing I don't like is the noise that this machine makes when I'm doing this. So we pulled that burr away. This is a little awkward coming in this way, but I come in here like this. And this is just more of a polishing action. So, you know, not using the guide, I'm not quite so concerned that I'm not, you know, getting the perfect angle. There's a little give in that leather, a little forgiveness, if you will. And go like that. Let's do this side a little bit more. And let's see what this does. On loose leaf paper, it's good. It's still not cutting perfect. Little toothy, you can kind of feel the toothiness. Looks like we need a little work right here, not catching. Right there, you see it start. And that to me is a whole reason for using paper for testing. Yeah, I can feel I still got burrs there, so let me do a little bit more like this. I'm gonna try and actually increase my angle a little bit to work more towards just the edge. Again, it kind of goes without saying, but I'll say it. I mean, this is a rotating piece of equipment. Be careful. I felt the stone touch my sleeve, so I should probably button up this sleeve. Don't want to have loose sleeves when you're working around this stuff. But hey, you're making knives. That's dangerous enough in itself, so use your common sense. And everybody will be okay. It's feeling better. Is it cutting better? That's the question. Yep, that's cutting fairly well. Down the whole length of the blade. But a true test is, does it cut telephone book paper? I'm not sure if we're there yet. It's pretty good. That is a 220 grit stone that we just sharpened this with. And that's not bad at all. Certainly is not a high polished edge. You can see, I mean, it's not a bad looking secondary bevel, but it's not like it pops like, oh wow, that's so shiny. But I think it's fairly impressive. And the big thing that I really wonder about this is if the TORMEK wheels fit on this, because if they did, I mean, I think TORMEK has some that go really high. And one thing I was thinking, like some crazy thoughts, for the price of this thing, if you could get the TORMEK wheels on here, and say if you bought 2 or 3, you put them all in a row, you've got like a sharpening system where you can go for like a 220 and then an 800 and then a 3000, boom, boom, boom. You would come up with some really nicely polished bevels and then pick your strop of choice to finish it all off with. But for the time that we spent on this edge was what, I don't know, maybe all of 5 minutes total. That's pretty impressive. That's not a bad edge at all, and that is perfectly usable in the kitchen. I don't know if it's quite shaving sharp. I don't know if I can show this because YouTube always demonetizes videos where you shave your arms. Yeah, it's shaving. Shaves arm hair. Great, I'm going to use this in my kitchen tonight. Tasty. So where does this leave us in terms of this knife sharpener? Obviously, this is not a long-term review. I haven't had this very long. I've spent about a half an hour sharpening knives on this, so I don't know. I hope it would last a little while. There's not a lot going on here. It's a motor and some wheels. And as far as the bars and all this stuff, I mean, no complaints there. With the countries that do this high volume, low cost manufacturing, there's some things that aren't that difficult. And you look at the components about this and what's involved with this machine, there's not much there. I dropped this water tank on the floor when I was taking it out of the box. It held up just fine. And honestly, I don't see I'm gonna have any issues with this. The one thing when you're using this, you will get water all over the place, so keep that in mind. But if you are a beginning knife maker and you really struggle with the sharpening, and that's at the end of the project, right? Like you've already gone through all the steps, you've made this knife, your blood, sweat, and tears are in this knife, and the most exciting part should be at the end when you finish it. When I was starting out, that was not the case. The most frustrating part was the sharpening. And it kind of made the end of the build bittersweet because I was really excited with how the knife turned out, how it was looking, everything's clean, it feels great, it's ready to go. All we need to do is sharpen it, and oh man, I don't want to sharpen this knife. That's what I found. If I had one of these way back in the day, man, I would have been stoked. That's also what kind of led me down this whole term of looking at every possible gadget for sharpening knives, gizmo, whatever you want to call it. I've messed around with a lot of them. The one that I had never tried out before was the TORMEK. I mean, I've done the, I got a Gatco or a Lansky, those things. I've got the Wicked Edge, the TS Prof, different belt sharpeners, paper wheels, all kinds of stuff. And then actually Japanese Waterstones is how I sharpen my kitchen knives now. But I went and took a class. I learned from some guy who had some really great tips, and I've gotten good that way. But for most EDC stuff, I honestly don't think there's any reason for something other than this setup right here. Again, we've got the cooled sharpening, which is a contentious issue for some people. One thing to note is that when I first filled this thing up and I put the stone on and turned it on, instantly the water was gone and it absorbed into this stone. So this thing's thirsty. When you first start using it, make sure this thing always has a decent amount of water in there. I also use distilled water just because if I want to leave this set up, you know, distilled water has all those minerals out of it and stuff like that, so probably less likely you're going to end up getting any water staining or weird sludge building up on this stone. But all in all, I think these are pretty good little sharpening systems. $179. I've seen these regular price, but different brands. They've got a different paint job, different branding. They're the exact same thing for $250 Canadian or Canadian pesos. That's around $200 American, something like that. But I think this is a worthwhile tool. And if you've been curious about them, hopefully this video will give you something to think about. My personal recommendation, for those of you that think it's worth anything, yes, definitely buy this. This is a good, solid purchase. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it helped you out, gave you something to think about. And if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so already. As always, I thank you so much for watching. Cheers.